specifically, um, Julia, whereabouts are you? Actually, I forget.
I'm in North York, but you want me to say like the
North
intersection?
York.
Like just
We actually live very close.
yeah, we live really close, exactly.
Yeah.
Not yet met. Um,
So I'm in North Toronto or Midtown, Durham.
oh, nice.
Robert's from Durham. Yay. And Jennifer's North York as well.
Oh, nice.
Yay. All right. So I think let's get started.
Okay. Oh,
Thank
Sonia's
you
here too.
everyone for joining us, for
Hi,
being so
Park.
on time. And oh, Karen's in High Park. Yay.
Nice.
Oh, Karen, your daughter's in Panda Mandarin at Etobicoke. That's really cool. And Sonia's here. Hey, Sonia. So Julia and I met very serendipitously, and we're really excited when we were just chatting. I think I was talking to Julia about chores, like my daughter not wanting to do her chores. And then so we got into the whole discussion and I said, "Oh my gosh, Julia, like there's so many parents that would love to hear like what you have to say and like our conversation." So that's how this whole idea came about. We thought even just like putting it out there, these struggles that we have as parents from collectivist societies, like and trying to raise kids in an individualistic society, what are those struggles that we kind of come head to head with? Yeah. So, Julia, do you want to just introduce yourself a
For
bit?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, do you want to introduce yourself too? Because I know there's some
Yeah,
people from my world and some people from your world, so you go for it and
exactly.
then I'll do mine.
Our worlds are connecting today. So, it's
Exactly.
really cool. Yeah. I mean, for everyone, it's really just a casual chat. And we're going to, address some key areas that Julia and I both shared with our networks. And then we're going to address some questions that you have already submitted to us in the registration and any questions that you have live for us that we would love to talk to you about as well. So first we'll do introductions. Julia, go first, and then I'll introduce myself. Yeah.
Sure. I'm Julia. Sorry. So I'm Julia Sen. I am a psychologist. I've been working in private practice for years and years and years with a special interest. I started out actually with a special interest in fertility counseling, and then that slowly, thankfully, shifted over to parenting as most of my clients were able to conceive. And parenting has always been a passion since I was a little kid. I've always wanted to help little kids, and I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician because, I'm Indian. So a doctor obviously would have been the first thing in my mind. But when I got to high school, science was not doing it for me, not the way I needed it to. So I took a pivot and I didn't get into psychology till significantly later. I actually did an undergrad in labor management relations. So completely different field. And I just happened upon psychology, to be honest, and it's been fantastic ever since. So I completed my PhD at U of T, and I have just had the pleasure of meeting incredible people like Yolanda. So I will hand it over to her now.
Thank you, Julia. And for the record, you are a doctor. So
True.
you have checked that box already. So I guess a little bit about me. I have a bit of a eclectic background. I'm an engineer turned teacher turned entrepreneur. So I know there's a couple of my clients from Panda Mandarin and Girls Strong here. And so I run a Mandarin school in Toronto, Etobicoke, and Markham. And I also run a nonprofit for girl empowerment called Girls Strong. And really, all this started because I became a mom myself 13 years ago, almost 13 years ago, and really felt that there was a need to support the whole experience of the child and the student, but also support the parents along the way. And I live with bipolar disorder, so I'm also a keynote speaker and a mental health advocate who is currently back in school for my third academic degree in counseling psychology. So I'm kind of following Julia's footsteps. So I'm getting my master's degree. And as of last week, I'm officially writing a book.
Oh,
So, yeah, I mean, Julia, you know this one already. So,
true.
and it's a book, part parenting, self-help book, part
Mm.
memoir, part time travel fiction. So, so I'm excited to share more later. But yeah, that's what I'm up to right now. Um, so we'll get started. You know, at any time, if you have questions or you want to share a thought, please feel free to do so. You don't need to raise your hand. This is really like a free form discussion. You know, there are three main areas that Julia and I have identified as topics that we will discuss today, which I sent out as a reminder email. You know, it's really about what does it mean to raise emotionally resilient and self-assured children? How does language shape cultural identity? And how do we navigate parenting differences with our partners? So, you know, it's there's just so much involved in parenting human kids. So, so I think that's what tonight's discussion is really about. And just feel free to interrupt, feel free to pop things into the chat, and then we'll have at least 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. Yeah. So yeah. So Julia, you want to start on this one? How do we raise emotionally resilient and self-assured children, especially you know in a culture that we are from that really valued obedience and achievement over our own emotional expression.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with valuing achievement and in academics and all of that. Like, an important part of our lives as well. I think that it's really important to also start to learn how to recognize that their emotions really matter and that when they are expressing their emotions, they are heard, like truly heard, where you're like pausing to kind of find out what's going on rather than sort of dismiss it or just not be tolerant of it. Like I remember as a kid, it's like anytime I'd have a feeling of some kind, oh, don't be silly, right? It was a quick done, right? Be done with it. So that's kind of what I did. I'm like, oh, I guess emotions aren't important, and I just put them away and focused on trying to be as good as I could at school. But really, at the end of the day, I'm a very emotional human being, and so it was really difficult to not be expressing that. So I used to get into a bit of trouble, right? Because it would just come out, even though that was being dismissed. So the key there is that when our children are actually sharing their emotions or having a tantrum, even when they're sad, our job is to actually regulate ourselves, like learn how to soothe and comfort ourselves so that we can actually stay with them in it. That's the hardest part, right? The reason they dismissed it wasn't because they didn't actually think it was right or wrong. They couldn't tolerate it, right? It was freaking their system out. And so it's natural. I get it. We're human. Hearing a screaming child or a whining kid, it starts to really get on our nerves, literally. So we want to be able to work on ourselves and focus on regulating that nervous system, soothing that nervous system, being compassionate to ourselves first, so that we can then be present with our children. Once you kind of start doing that and you see them, you soothe them, you're obviously keeping them safe, they start to take that in, and then the strength, the resilience, the confidence, it just kind of naturally shows up.
I totally agree. And I think one thing you shared just now that I really echo is for us as parents to be able to sit with that discomfort when we observe that emotional outburst from our kids because we didn't experience that type of safety of space, most likely, right? We didn't experience that as children. So we are now asked to have a behavior as parents that we weren't modeled. And I think that
Exactly.
is really hard. And that takes so much self awareness, that takes so much hard work. But I agree with you that it is absolutely important. And I remember, and if you could put into the chat, how old are your kids? Like, I would love to know because that could help us direct some of our conversation as well, so that it's most beneficial for you. And I noticed that Robert mentioned something.
Yeah, I was just reading.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a really slow reader, so I literally just finished reading that. So yeah, it's so true because we are taught to mask our own feelings. And something happened to me very recently that on this topic that I want to share, which has given me so much insight about myself, is um, so Dr. Shefali is one of my favorite parenting experts. Like I literally have her books right on my desk for my research for my own book. So there's three of her books right here. And I had a chance to ask her a question live with my teacher, Gabor Mate. And I was so excited because I was like, oh my God, my two favorite authors in the same place. And I get to talk to them. So I was really giggly. I was very excited. And I asked her a question that is really something actually many of us could relate. It's about marriage and parenting. And I posted the full answer on my Instagram page if you want to see it and a clip of the video. But what came afterwards is this overwhelming sense of shame. And it's because I felt like I expressed too much. I was too excited. I wasn't that calm, professional, in my mind, like polished self anymore. I was giddy, I was silly, I was excited. And to Robert's point, like I was never given safe space to express myself that way as a child. So that inner child in me that came out because I'm in the presence of my favorite teachers and she just came out. She was so happy and so excited. And then shame took over right away and was like, "No, you don't do that. That is not okay." And it brought me back to when I was 5 years old, being very excited and overly like exuberant, and my mom just slapped me across the face and said, "I will never take you out here again like this. You are embarrassing me." And I forgot about that. But because of this event that happened with Dr. Shefali and Gabor, and I brought that shame to a therapy session, my therapist helped me reconnect with that memory. And
Mm.
she said, "Well, no wonder you felt so much shame because you were waiting for that other shoe to drop. You were waiting to get in trouble." And I think that's why it is so important for us to try to break those damaging patterns for our kids and to help them to be okay with expressing their authentic selves. And I remember when my daughter was 2, I took a course. It was like a 10-week parenting course called Incredible Years. And it was one of the best courses I've taken. And I still use some of the strategies. And I can see that there are some, like, Hey Yan has 2 boys, age 3 and 1. So some of these things you can really use that I'm about to share. But no matter how old they are, this is important. And one of the key things I learned in that course was they said, always help your child name their emotions. So if they're getting really upset, instead of reacting with them, you just say, "You're getting really upset," or "You're really angry," "You're really sad," or "You're really happy," or "You're being really calm." So when you can help them name their emotions as you see it, you are actually mirroring them and you're allowing them the safety and the space to connect with their own emotional expressions. So, if I were to leave any tip here from just this topic, is help your children become emotionally literate by identifying and naming their own emotions.
Love that. Yeah, that's amazing. And it's so hard, right? To have that experience and you're just being happy or whatever you're silly or whatever you were being and then to suddenly have that shocking, experience. But this is where, culturally, especially this impression management piece, right, is such a huge stressor. So you were embarrassing her clearly at some level. That's what was happening within her. So her
Yeah.
overwhelm just let her, you gotta stop, right? Because it actually feels like a safety threat. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's where there's this visceral reaction. So
Yeah.
it's so easy for us to get there because it's like ingrained in us, this embarrassing feeling is not nice. And we have to impress, right? So it's really so critical to kind of acknowledge that in this generation as we're parenting, to recognize that it's in us, it's going to show up. Right. So, and not to be upset with ourselves if it shows up, but more like, okay, I've seen it. There it is, right? Sometimes it's going to be repairing it because it slipped out. It's already done, but I can come back and I can repair that with them, right? Um, but sometimes it'll be where I'm aware of it and like, oh wow, here it is. I'm feeling like I need to shut them down because they're embarrassing me right now. And just starting to get to know ourselves and how that shows up, and then bringing kindness and compassion in to soothe that again, right? Breathing, vagus nerve exercises, those are my favorite. Really just regulating the system. There's a technique called havening that I've discovered recently by Dr. Kate Truitt. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. There's a book called Healing in Your Hands. And
I'll put that in the chat.
yeah, it's fabulous. A fabulous book. It's a workbook I mean the essence is that you're soothing literally like this or with your hands like this, but when we start doing that, we're able to kind of bring our system back to a normal state so that we can then parent them how we need to, right? Connect and shift.
It's so funny. Like, I'm not joking. I literally have this on my desk,
Mm.
polyvagal deck cards, to help regulate, the different states. And I think that's why Julia and I clicked so well. Like, we just didn't even plan that these like things that we're doing and learning about that's completely aligned. But I did put the book that Julia mentioned in the chat. She's not affiliated with this, but it's just these are great resources as well.
Totally.
Yeah, and I think isn't it so true that parenting when you didn't get what you needed as a child, so much of it is about bringing self-awareness, right? To not go to those automatic reactions of anger or mostly anger. I'm not really sure what other big emotions, we have, but it is our responsibility. And I think the fact that you are all here or those who are listening to the recording, the fact that you're doing that really shows to us that this is important to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be taking time to hear about parenting, especially with, relating to cultural expectations. So I just want to applaud you and acknowledge you for doing that. So the next, yes, yay! I forgot to mention that like my internet was getting kind of glitchy. So if I start to talk like a robot or cut out, Julia's just gonna take over. So we're just gonna roll with it. I'm gonna blame it on the weather. I don't know what's
Exactly.
happening.
I just
Um,
want to acknowledge that Karen has a question or
oh yeah,
comment.
go for it.
So she has an almost 4-year-old. Would you say the approach is in line with modern parenting styles like responsive or gentle parenting that acknowledges and processes emotions? Yes, for sure it is. I think that I'll just make a quick comment about the word gentle parenting. I think it's gotten a bad rap. We don't have to be soft and gentle like this with our children. That's not, if that's not your personality, that's not going to feel authentic to your child, right? They're just going to roll their eyes at you and then you're going to get offended by that. So really, gentle parenting is about, yeah, seeing them, right? Dr. Dan Siegel said it the best. He's a specialist as well in child parenting. And he says, see your child, soothe your child, and keep them safe. Those three S's make a secure attachment. And that's what really gives them what they need. So our approach to them is going to be, I have a technique that I call fair parent. I'm a big acronyms person, so all my programs are acronym based. And Fair Parent really is to be that, bring that tone of fairness to the table. When they're 2 years old, you can be a little cuter and softer with them. But, at 5 years old, 6 years old, and just straight up, they like to be respected, just like we want to be respected. And I think that's how we can look at, connecting emotionally with them, if that does that make sense?
Yeah. And I agree with you that the word gentle parenting often suggests that there are no boundaries or that you're just letting them do whatever they want. And I don't think gentle parenting is permissive parenting. I feel um, there's so one of my favorite books, whenever parents in either Panda Mandarin or Girls Run ask me for recommendations, there are two books that I always recommend, depending on the age of their kids. So for younger kids, I always recommend this book, The Conscious Parent by Dr. Shafali, and I'll put the link in the chat as well, um, because it's so all encompassing. And everything that Julia and I have talked about, will talk about, she addresses it from a foundational level. And it's really amazing for all parents. And if you have slightly older kids, let's say preteens to teens, the book I always recommend is by Dr. Gabor Mate and Gordon, oh my gosh, Newfield,
Newfield.
Newfield, yeah,
Yeah.
um, called Hold On to Your Kids. And I think these two parenting books really is like are all you need. And I want to share something from just one of them on the topic of gentle parenting. It's actually another book by Dr. Shafali called The Awakened Family. It's the book she wrote after conscious parenting. And in here, she said, every child really needs three things. They need to know that they are seen, that they are worthy, and that they matter. So those are the three key things as parents we are responsible to make our kids feel. And I really see that, as now a mom of an almost 13-year-old, how important those three elements are. That she knows that she is seen, that I see her, not the version of her that I want to see, but the true self that she has, the authentic self that she is, and that she is worthy no matter what. And I think the words no matter what is so key. We often say, I love you, I love you, I love you. But I think we need to we need to also add like no matter what. No matter if you are having a temper tantrum, no matter if you fail the course, like no matter what happens,
Oh,
you are loved. Sorry, Fiona, I'm gonna just mute you because you have a
Oh,
bit of
sorry
a
about that.
background.
Sorry.
It's okay, don't worry. It's cute though. Um, so so I think that is a really important thing to keep in mind that they understand that they are worthy. I didn't know until 4 years ago, my first silent meditation retreat experience. I didn't know that I am worthy of love no matter what. I even challenged the facilitator. I was like, I think what you said is so entitled. She said something like, unconditional love is your birthright to the group. We were in silence. She said that, and it stuck in my head. And I was like, I'm going to challenge her. As soon as I can speak, I'm going to challenge that. And I did. And I said, I think that sounds so entitled. Like people, there's just so much entitlement in the world right now. And that just perpetuates that. And she's like, why do you think that you're not entitled to unconditional love? And I was like, well, we're just not. We gotta be good people. We have to be kind. Like there are things that we have to do. We're not just like automatically loved. And and like that whole discussion blew my mind and made me realize that it's because I come from such an achievement based upbringing that I didn't even know. Truly, I didn't even know. that I am worthy of being loved, even if I have zero achievements. And I'm not blaming my parents. Like, my mom was a pediatrician. Like, she was trained in dealing with kids, but she was not trained in parenting. And they did not know these things. And they did the best they could with the tools that they had, with the patterns that they inherited. But I think it's just so important for us to not fall into the same traps and to be aware of like our own stuff, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So that
because
was a
we
lot,
can.
as with any parenting topic, I think. But oh, I just saw Robert's message. Yeah, I know, waiting for punishment. Like it's like that, like your heart is in your throat feeling.
Yeah.
So the second question, or the second topic, was how does language shape cultural identity, and what are the emotional impacts of preserving or losing heritage language? So I'll take this one first, and then of course, Julia, jump in anytime and add your perspective as well. I have like an hour worth of things to say, at least about this topic, but I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. I mean, the whole reason I launched Panda Mandarin 10 years ago is because it was so important to me that my daughter can speak to my family in China in Mandarin. And I felt that if she couldn't, then she could never build that true, authentic connection with them because they weren't going to learn English. So for me, that need was quite visceral. Like, I just really, really needed her to learn Mandarin. And you know, 7 years ago when my grandmother passed away and she went to visit and was able to converse fluently with my grandmother, her great grandmother, I just thought my job is done. Like, I felt that sense of like peace, that I was able to bring so much joy to my grandmother, and that my daughter is so proud that she can talk, you know, in her mother tongue to my grandmother. And so I think language does really shape identity. I wrote a research article for Globe and Mail a few years ago, where the statistics that I found interviewing different families and linguistics experts is that by the third generation, the heritage language is no longer alive and well in the family. It's gone. And it's because their larger environment does not support the continuation of the language. And it is a fault of our education system, but it's also just the reality of, you know, leaving your culture behind, and keeping a language so hard. So there's a lot of thoughts that I have around language and culture, and I think that sometimes some of the parents, you know, I don't know if some of the Panda Mandarin clients' parents here feel that way, but I think there's a lot of pressure on parents to do so much around language learning, and it's so hard to keep it up because there's so many pressures in all areas. And language learning is one of those things that takes so much work, but you don't see the results sometimes until years later. And so, what I would say to that is you also have to pick and choose what you're capable and able to take on. I mean, yes, language preservation is important and it will impact your child's connection to your culture, to your family. But sometimes, you know, like Maria, you mentioned you have a child with special needs. Like, they're just competing needs, and you can't always say what is most important. What's most important is what your child needs the most, right? And so I would say language was really important for my daughter when she was little, until she was maybe like 6 or 7. And then what became really important is to develop her positive mindset and habits. And I think that's why I ended up launching Girl Strong and wanted to really develop her social emotional learning, skills because I felt that's really important and that's going to last her for the rest of her life, and kind of moved away from the day-to-day operations of Panda Mandarin. So my husband took over. But it's because my priority also shifted and I realized what was, really going to set the tone for her, for a longer period. So I don't know if there are any questions about that. Yeah, Maria, go ahead.
Um, in terms of the language, for me, like my dad was Greek, and I never learned Greek. So a lot
Mm,
of people, my we I think most of we were mostly in Montreal, so the focus was French when I was little, and I learned French, but never learned Greek. Um, and for my daughter, because she has special needs, I wanted her to learn French. And when she was little, she was delayed in her speech. And I talked to the really good speech therapist that was at one of her schools when she was little, and he said, "Yeah, you can do both, but one of you have to talk in French to her."
mm,
And I'm like, "But then who's gonna do the English?" Like it would be really hard to do like me just do that because she was delayed, and then it's like, well, she's gonna learn, but she's gonna learn some things in English, some things in French. And I really thought about it. Like I actually did the French part, the the Surrey place, but there was a French francophone one, and I
okay.
did have someone come a little bit to do a little bit with her, and she was learning a little bit, but then they stop right when they go to school. So
Mm,
I said, "I'll forget it. Like I can't do it by myself and do both, and then try to get her to learn English because I want people to understand her." So I just gave up on the French. So, but I was really struggling for the language. And then I said, okay, I can't do it. I can't do it.
Yeah.
yeah, and you can't do everything, and I think that's the key, right? I mean, learning Greek would be so great, and learning French would be so great. Like, there's so many opportunities to learn. Like, my daughter did French immersion for 3 years, and then we pulled her out. My husband thought it'd be great for her to be trilingual, right? English, French, and Mandarin, but it didn't work out. It was just too much. And so sometimes you have to go with what makes sense for your kids. And
Also,
I
I'm
think
just gonna
Julia has
jump
some
in.
interesting perspective to share on this too,
Yeah.
raising biracial kids
Yeah,
too.
exactly, exactly. So I married a white guy. So, and I'm Indian. So my parents are from India. They immigrated, and we were living with my mom actually. So when I was pregnant with my second daughter, my father passed away, so we ended up living there and with them. And so my mom was there. And so I asked her to speak Bengali, right, with the kids. And she's learned so much English since immigrating here, 50 years ago, that to her, she was like, I just keep slipping into English again. I'm like, really? You are? How am I supposed to do it if you are? So I speak Bengali fluently, but I also was like, kind of, I'll let her do it. When I realized nobody was doing it, we're like, how do we maintain our heritage, right? And it was in other ways. So they would go to our, Durga Puja, we call it. So it's a yearly, festival. We would dress them up and take them places in their, traditional outfits and get to know India and what it means to be Indian and our culture and with relatives and all of that. So that's how we maintained our culture, even though the language has fallen off, which I'm sad about, for sure. I'm sad about. But to all of your points, is that you have to pick, right? Like it wasn't working. I'm like, okay, mom, you're doing this. I'm doing my PhD. You do the language, right? And it was just not, um, just didn't stick. So, but we didn't lose the culture at all, right? I think is the point of that. Yeah.
Well, I also think that culture and language, even though they do go like hand in hand, but you don't need to not immerse them in culture if they don't speak the language. So
Right.
like you said, there's so many ways. Like for example, I this summer I'm thinking of sending my daughter to China for a summer camp. And I know that was actually one of the questions somebody raised in the registration forms, which we'll address later. But yeah, so there are just like so many different ways. And the reason I'm doing that is for both cultural and language immersion. I just thought, two birds with one stone. There we go. I checked my box there. So yeah, so sometimes we have to be creative, right? Just so that we just can't do everything. And I think this is a great lead in to the next question, which I think Julia will take first, is how do we navigate parenting differences with our partners? You talked about the white guy you married. So there you go. There's a big difference. Parenting differences with your partner or extended family when the cultural and generational values don't align.
Yeah. It's important to not force, one type of parenting on the other partner, right? But it's very hard not to. I'll just say that, right? And I think that in our situation, Larry's family, they're very Canadian. I mean, there is an Australian heritage there, but they're very Canadian. And the interesting part was it was too passive, right? It was more on like the neglect side, right? So I kind of just got to do my thing because of that. So we weren't seeing the differences other than me saying, why are they not more interested? Why are they not more like sharing? Why don't they want to share more about, their histories or anything? And so that was more of our conflict. So it was a bit more of a, we're like, we know what we wanted to share. My family knew exactly what we were doing. But then his were way more passive, like way more. So, and that was actually distressing for me because I'm like, I wanted them to know a little bit more about your family, your life, and your history, but that wasn't their style, right? They didn't share emotion, they didn't share much, really. So, um, and for me, that was just like, this is so odd, right? Because we overdo it, right? And so this was the interesting dynamic there. But what I think in general, I would say to that question, even with the clients that I've worked with who aren't aligned in their parenting, it really is important to separately, like if you're having constant conflicts about how you're parenting, right? Separately, just sit down and say, okay, what are our values at the end of the day? Like, what can we match on some of the values that we want? Like, do we want children who end up being generous? Do we want them to be, like kind? Do we want like what are we looking for here for our children? And rather than specific things that we want to make sure that we are passing on, it's really more about the values. Once we can meet on the values, how we get there, we can start to respect each other more. But when we don't know if the way they're doing it is going to get to the end of the value, that's when I start to like resist it. Like, what are you doing? That's not okay. Instead, like have a conversation. Okay, what do we really want? Right. And that really does help a lot with breaking some of these differences and realizing they're not that different actually. We're just taking two roads to the same place, but we didn't realize we were headed to the same place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think it's so interesting that I have very similar experience with my in-laws. It's not so much that there's conflict of values, it's that they're just not involved at all.
Right.
And and so, I've recently learned a term called low effort family or zero effort family.
Hmm.
And I find that really interesting. It's where there are just some families, they're very low effort. The interactions are quite superficial and not very frequent either. And so I would say, my daughter doesn't really have like much influence or relationship with my husband's family, which is unfortunate, in many ways, um, but also trying to access the compassion that I have for different upbringings, different family structures and styles too, that to normalize that it's okay. because my family's very different. They're very involved, and there's like
Exactly.
just polar opposites. Kind of like what you described, and what I know, what you've shared with me before as well. And Robert has something that he shared too. It's
Yeah.
funny. He said
Yeah.
they speak English and act Chinese. Like, there's a term bananas, where you're yellow on the outside. And actually, no, then this is like the opposite. I don't know what fruit that would be. Um, but yeah, like your wife is defining her own culture, what you want to pass on. And yeah, and you know what, we get to define that too, right? Like my husband, even though his family may not be very involved, he is very involved as a parent, and he is really establishing those traditions and his own version of culture, for my daughter, that is his unique brand, that
Hmm.
he's passing down, right? Like even without his family, being very involved at all. So I think as your little family unit, even without the extended family's influence, you really get to control like what it is that you want to establish for your kids' upbringing. Yeah, your own legacy. Exactly. Robert took the word out of my mouth. Exactly. You get to define your own legacy. Um, but I think communication is so key here between partners, right? Spouses, partners, co-parents. Like that communication piece is key because kids will inevitably detect conflict. They will inevitably understand that there is a mismatch in values. So I think really being conscious and intentional about what you want to set as that legacy, or that those memories or those cultural elements for your kids, I think it's so important.
Totally, totally. And just speaking to just to the last part of that, the extended family, right? When
Yeah.
cultural or generational values don't align, it's very challenging when it's extended family because there is a
Hmm.
certain level of, intrusion that can come in at times. And we are all, of course, taught to be very respectful of our elders, and as I believe in that. Um, but we don't have to be disrespectful to be able to share what we are trying to now create, to
Yeah.
the point around that legacy piece, right? That we don't have to disrespect their values. We're acknowledging them and saying, hey, we know that this is how it's been done. And, right, not even a but, it's just a straight and this is how we're going to be, looking at our family dynamics, and we're going to be shifting things a little bit because it's changed. Everything has sort of shifted and changed. So it can be done again respectfully, but still creating that new pattern now. Right. I think
Yeah.
that's really important. I mean, my mom was always like, okay, I always joke because my mom's like, okay, now I'm grandma. Now I'm in this throne is kind of almost how she implies it, right? Like I've earned my place to be here now, and now everybody's going to listen to me, right? And then I come along and then challenge everything. And she's like, "What happened?" I'm like, "Sorry, you got the short end of the stick because she did all the obedient things. She did all the things. So, okay, I'll have my day when people finally listen to me, and then I don't." And so, but we kind of joke about it now that poor thing, she missed out, but it had to shift somewhere. And at least I was able to do it kindly with her, right? And I think it took work to be able to do it. But it's really important to recognize that we can be that change, and it doesn't have to be a huge feud.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think what you said about just acting with kindness and compassion, it's so key. And I think that really speaks to like how much you respect your mom. And I think that kind of power struggle happens a lot. Like it happened between me and my mom and still happens at times. And I think it's just sometimes just part of their programming, that they think I've served my time, now this is my turn, right?
exactly.
And it's up
Exactly.
to us to hold space for that, but also to say, actually, no, like have our own boundaries.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And,
so we
and
will
honoring
address actually,
ourselves, right? Like that's the key,
yeah,
you know.
yeah,
And
honor.
I just want to say that it's really hard to do what I just said. Okay. So it does take work on ourselves. And I'm just going back to the Vegas exercises like VAGUS. They're critical, right? Once I started to really do the breathing, do like several different exercises that exist for it, that's when I started to be able to be kind. Even though I always wanted to be kind, I wasn't pulling it off very well. I mean, that's the reality of it, right? And sure, I'll still have days, but overall, like it's so much better. But it doesn't just come because I said, "Oh, I should be kind to my mother." If we had this, the back and forth, and then with the work on my own nervous system, I was able to actually practice what I wanted. So it's not an automatic thing. I'm just sharing that.
Yeah, it really takes time. Like I've been meditating for about 17 years now and more regularly for the past 5. And when I skip a day, my daughter would say, like, and I would just like be dysregulated and act in not so great ways. She'd be like, "Hey, did you like not meditate this morning or something? What's going on with you?" And I'll be
That's
like, "Yeah, that's true, actually." But because it's a muscle, right? It's a muscle that you build so that you actually give yourself more space between trigger and reaction. And I think that's what, the polyvagal work or the vagus nerve exercises will help you do. It's to just give you more time to react.
exactly. Exactly.
So I thought maybe we can open up to questions now, like if people here have questions, and then once we address the questions here, we'll address the questions that people submitted in the registration form.
And I'm just going to drop into the chat, or Yolanda, you probably have it on your thing, the survey, just so it's in there. We just were
Oh, good
hoping that you
idea.
could do a survey for us, so that we get a sense of how the
It's
workshop
very
went.
short. It's just
Very
three
short.
questions. It'll take you like a minute to do, but
Exactly.
it's really helpful for Julia and I because we might do more of these workshops together if this is something that would be of value to you. So if you could take a minute to do the survey, that would be great. Yeah, thank you, Julia. She'll put it in the chat.
Yep.
I see that Karen is here. So Karen had a question. Um, if there's no other, first, are there questions that you want to ask? Yeah, go ahead, Maria.
I recently, well, actually, Christmas time, I have my dad's Greek and my mom's from Trinidad with Indian descent. So, uh, my my mom is the one from Trinidad. So her brother lives in Oakville. So we um I don't really have any other family from her side. So we went for we went in the summertime. We actually went on vacation together. And that worked out okay because my aunt is not very mobile. So um, my uncle seemed more understanding with my daughter. Um, but then we went at Christmas time and to his house, and we ended up staying for the 2 weeks. And he kind of got, I think it would be overwhelmed, would be the word, with my daughter because she was loud and he slowly said, "Oh, she can't go in this room. She can't go in that room." And and like he wanted her. We were actually there and clean. We stayed longer because he asked if we could clean out the basement because we usually stay in part of the basement when we come, and we cleaned it out, we moved the couch, we made it got he actually got a TV so she could watch TV downstairs. So he slowly wanted her to stay downstairs. And then whenever she misbehaved, um, he would say stuff and then he would ask me stuff. And then whatever I said to him, he says, "Oh, you're just making up excuses. Um, like you didn't train her from when she was little."
Hmm. Yeah,
And
that's hard.
I'm like, what? So my uncle's 82. He's a retired teacher. He's very, very smart, very observant of things. He said some, things that I could see. He was very observant of things, but I was like cringing and I couldn't say anything. And he doesn't want us to come back there with my daughter until I don't know. He says you can come, the two of you can come, like my partner and I can come, but he goes, leave your daughter with somebody. He doesn't want her there because he's like, I know he's stressed because he's dealing with taking care of my aunt and she's like slowly deteriorating. So I think it has to do with that, but I was just, um, I don't know.
Yeah,
How,
Maria, it really sounds like it's startling and it's a horrible thing to hear somebody say that about your child, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's really hard. And uh, the hard but key thing to be able to do there is to not personalize it, right? Is to recognize that this is his inability to regulate. And, his nervous system is also shot probably. And like you said, he's stressed from all of the things. So he was just blurting out what he needed because he couldn't handle it. But it's not your parenting, it's just his inability in that moment to be able to handle it. And so he just was like, no, I need you to stay away. Right. Um, and then making a decision of your own. Like, do you want to visit without your daughter? That's up to you. You can not visit and visit. You can visit out at a restaurant or something altogether sometime. It's not to not visit, but it's maybe not there, right? And you can choose not to go. That's okay. It's okay if you don't want my daughter. I can't come either, right? Um, and be okay with that, right?
you know,
Yeah,
I haven't gone back.
right,
Yeah.
right.
I
Yeah,
And I
I
think
was
that's fair.
yeah,
totally.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just add that he gets to have his boundaries, you get to have your boundaries, and that's okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it must be really hard, but
yeah.
yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks.
And I know that Karen had to go, but
Right.
I wanted to, oh, I think Robert has a question. Um,
Okay.
oh, thank you. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, please feel free to follow both Julia and myself. We post a lot of different content on Instagram, LinkedIn. So, Julia, do you mind put in the chat like our links?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I'll share it too in the follow-up email with the recording as well. So, yeah, I could just do that too.
Oh, okay.
I
Why don't
just
we do
wanted
that?
to
Yeah.
address, okay, yeah. So, is there any other questions live before I start addressing the questions that people posted in the registration forms?
Nope.
No, thanks.
Thank you.
Um, so maybe I'll pick a question from the registration forms. And I know we have 3 minutes, so just being respectful of your time. Julia and I will just stay a little bit longer to just at least answer all the questions that people have submitted to us. And that way it's in the recording. So if you want to watch, but if you have to leave at 8 o'clock, please feel free to. We really appreciate you joining us live on the snowy April day. So yeah, thank you so much. And then I'll send out a follow-up email with the recording as well so that you can catch all the questions. So the question that I thought was really interesting and kind of relates to Maria's question too, and a few other things we talked about. The question is, how do you explain in kid-friendly terms why grandpa takes a very patriarchal approach, meaning control, listen, obedience, while our family is respective, but encourages open discussion with kids?
You asking me?
Well,
Just
for
kidding.
both of us. Would you like me to go first? It's up to
Yeah,
you.
you
What
go
do you think?
first on that one. Yeah.
Okay, I can go. I can go first. So I think that, this goes back to what Julia and I already talked about in terms of extended families and having different cultural expectations and practices. And just like we said, your, you know, family unit, you are allowed to establish your own rules and cultural expectations. Like you're your own little culture. And of course, extended families have an impact, right? In this case, is the grandpa. But I think it is important to know that kids are very receptive and adaptive. If you explain to them in clear, easy to understand language, which is what the question is asking, such as, grandpa has a different experience. Grandpa needs different things. And he might say things this way, but it's okay if you're upset. You can always talk to us. We were sharing about boundaries. It is totally okay to establish boundaries with your parents. I have done that with my parents, and it's really hard. Like, it's not easy. Maria's example with her uncle, that's not easy. But it is important for us to do that hard work. It's just like you wouldn't send your kids off to in a situation that the person is unsafe. Well, if your parents are acting in a way that is unsafe for your kids, then you have really two choices. One is you don't send them, or two, you make the situation safe for them. Because your parents are adults, as much as they have their own cultural conditioning and patterns, they can reason with you and you need to tell them. And I have said that to my mom many times when we come head to head with things that we disagree on. Sometimes she'll tell my daughter, "Oh, if you don't fall asleep, then the mice will come." And like, it's like a thing that kids they said to me when I was little, like they're gonna eat your brain, or like, these things to scare them, you know? And so my daughter would tell me like, "Oh, grandma said this. When does that happen? Is it?" And then she's scared to go to sleep. So I'll tell my mom, "You keep doing that, she is never sleeping over. Okay? You cannot scare her like that." And so I see it as it's hard. Like parents are in this like sandwich situation, right? Like we have the hardest job of dealing with the generation before and protecting the generation after. But that
With
is a
nobody who
job.
protected us.
Nobody protected us, I know. But we don't want to pass on. It's like, those memes that you've seen with the matches, right? Like you want the matches to keep burning. The COVID, you saw that in COVID too. But you can just remove yourself. Or do you want to take the burden that was placed onto you to pass it down to the next generation? So then you have to do the hard work and have those difficult conversations. And I really see it as having those two choices. But it is important for you to explain to the kids that, not everything grandpa says is right. Like, and I say that to my daughter. I'm like, sometimes grandma makes shit up. Like it's just not right. Like, and that's what she was used to. I mean, obviously no swearing, but like, she just sometimes makes this up. And please check with me. You need to be that direct line of communication with your kids. And this is important no matter who they're dealing with, right? They need to feel safe with you to tell you that someone told them these stories or someone behaved in this way that is incongruent with their own experiences, with what your own family unit has established as the cultural norm. So
I love that.
that's my take on this. What do you think, Julia?
100%. I agree 100%. And that's the most important thing is when your child says something to you, you don't tell them, "Oh, it's your grandmother. You must just listen." Right?
Right.
That's what we used to do. That's how it always was, right? And
Yeah.
it's so important to not just that's not respect. That's not teaching your children how to respect them. That's just teaching your children how to disrespect themselves,
Right.
right? So if we want them to respect their grandma, yeah, we'll teach them how to respect grandma, but it doesn't mean we have to listen to every single thing she says, right?
Yeah.
That's the key here. And when they know, like you said, that we are creating that safe place for them to come and connect to us and that we're going to actually hear them and go, yeah, you know what, that wasn't okay, right?
Yeah.
That must have felt yucky, right? Let me give you that hug so that we can, and then let's maybe you want to go and talk to grandma now or not or whatever, but it's they know that you've got them
Yeah.
and then we can navigate at anything, right? Like that's the key. So yeah,
It's so
100%,
true.
of
It's
course.
so true. We've got them. Yeah.
Totally.
And so the next question is, I guess this is more for me. The question is, would you recommend immersive experiences like language camp, trips to areas that speak the language locally? Absolutely. And Sonia actually also mentioned about using music and pop culture to create immersion and experience and exposure. So I think it's very, very appropriate and actually helpful. So I'm actually thinking about sending my daughter, I mentioned earlier, to China for a summer camp this year. And it's an immersive experience both for language and for culture. So yeah, I would highly, highly recommend it. And if you're interested, if you're watching this on recording and you're interested in learning more, let me know. I'd be happy to share what research I have done on language summer camps, immersive summer camps. So yeah, so that's that one. I don't know, Julia, if you want to add anything to that.
I don't think so. I think, yeah, to your point. I mean, traveling is a similar sort of concept to me. It's not as immersive because you're not living it, but uh, if you can travel, travel. I mean, we took the kids for 6 weeks to Australia, and it was phenomenal, right? They went to India, they went to Australia. Like, we really wanted to expose them. We're privileged enough to be able to do that. I'm very grateful for that. But when we can, it's worth it, right?
Yeah.
And one thing I will say, and it's not quite around that, but it's a similar idea that when you're taking kids places, we had this opportunity to go to the southwestern coast of Australia, which is like under Perth. There's
Mm,
really nothing there. Okay. So, when you're there, you feel like you're like, oh my God, am I on the edge of the world? Like it just feels like there's nothing anywhere around you. But there's this beautiful section that my uncle said you got to go to because he lives in Perth. And had we not been a little more adventurous than we normally are, right? We would have missed out on incredible
mm,
experiences. And, normally we're staying in decent places and, but this like we were in like these trailer parks and like dealing with spiders and, you know, but but I would not take that away, right? Because we were able, like the kids were able to climb this 80-meter tree from the outside. It was wild, right? Wild. There's just pegs all the way around it. It was crazy. Anyway, but the point is, I'm just saying that, when we were talking about immersing them, like really immerse them, like let them feel the truth of the culture, the heritage, not the luxuries only, right? That's fine too.
yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it's
I
really,
think that's so true. Wow, that must be an amazing experience.
it was, yeah.
The next question is more for you to answer. So the question is more like a comment, but question is that she said, I would love to hear more about mixed culture kids, like Asian, non-Asian. So how
Totally.
does that impact like parenting choices and yeah.
Yeah, there's almost always a dominant culture.
Mm,
That's what I've seen in with all the parents that I've worked with, and really is checking in to make sure that you're not dominating, right? Because there's sort of a natural, I'll say more often than not, it's the mom's family, but not always.
mm,
It could, let's say the mom's family is let's say the dad's family is Asian, the mom's family is not, there's a chance that the dad's family is going to dominate then, because culturally we just are more
mm,
there, right? Indians, Asians, like we're just more present that way. Greek, right? It's also pretty dominant culture. So I think that it's one big part around parenting with that is to make sure that I'm sort of watching if I am of the dominant culture, am I
Mm,
taking over, right? And how is the partner feeling about that?
right.
Uh, so that you're really allowing both to show up. And in terms of the children, you know, they typically, like mine, have blended, I would say, quite well. Like they're very aware of their Indian heritage, as I mentioned, and appreciate it. Um, but they definitely have their, Canadian side, so to speak, right? Like there is very clear, and I don't know, it just when you're just open to everything, it blends okay. When you're trying to
Yeah,
fight for something, it actually makes it worse, right? So it's really
right.
staying open to like, yeah, there's more than enough room for both.
Yeah,
And I think that somehow we think there isn't, or some urge comes to want to say, no, we have to be this, right? We can be both, right? So my children really identify as both,
yeah.
like South Asian and white, right? So and they don't seem to be in conflict about it. Yeah,
And I mean, I don't have personal experience with, Asian, non-Asian. My husband is also Asian, but I think when we talk about, but his family's from Hong Kong, my family is from mainland China, so there's still like a lot of differences too. But I agree with you that often there is a dominant culture, sometimes just because of which family is more involved or which family is more interested in the the children,
right.
then by nature that becomes the dominant culture.
Exactly.
But I think it ebbs and flows. So it's not like it has to be perfectly 50-50. Sometimes maybe it's 90-10, and then that changes over time. And it can also be led by the children, right? Because they might, once they're a bit older, they might become really interested in Australian culture, or they might be really interested in Indian culture. Like it can also change based on their evolving interests.
Totally. 100%. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so with that, I think we will conclude the live portion of our workshop. And thank you all so much for being here. I just saw Annalisa's here. Hi, Annalisa. I didn't get the chance to say hi, and Fiona. Um, so really appreciate you all being here. Thank you, Maria, as well. And thank you to everyone who is watching the recording. So please take a minute to fill in the survey. We would love to know your feedback. And
You'll
Julia
put
and
the
I
survey
may
in the
quote this again.
recording. You'll put the survey in the recording as well, the survey link.
Yeah, I'll put the
The link.
survey. So I
Email.
will get the recording and then I'll put the survey like in the
Perfect.
email with the recording.
Awesome.
And oh, thank you, Annalisa. Thank you, Fiona. Really
Thank
Oh,
appreciate
you.
thank
it.
you.
And Julia, can you hang on for a few minutes?
Of course, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll say bye to everyone else. Have a good night. Stay
Thanks so
warm.
much, everybody.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. And I'll stop recording. Okay, there we go. Stop recording. And have a good night, Fiona.
Good night,
Bye,
Yolanda.
Fiona.
Good night.
All right.
What'd you think?
Yeah, it went well. It went
I
well.
thought so.